The dust on Evanston's Main Street swirled up in lazy spirals as Elena Dawson stepped down from the wooden boardwalk. Her worn leather satchel clutched tight against her chest, but what made her heart hammer wasn't the journey ahead. It was the way the stagecoach driver's eyes narrowed when he saw her face. She had walked 3 miles into town that morning in 1878, her moccasins leaving faint prints in the Wyoming dirt. And now, as she approached the Wells Fargo station with her carefully saved coins warm in her palm, she felt the familiar weight of eyes following her movements. Elena was Shoshone on her mother's side, though her father had been a trapper from Pennsylvania, and the mix showed in her features in ways that made some folks uncomfortable and others downright hostile. "Fare to Cheyenne, please," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands as she placed the coins on the wooden counter. The driver, a thick-necked man with tobacco stains in his graying beard, didn't even look at the money. He spat a brown stream into the dirt near her feet and shook his head. "Stage is full." Elena glanced at the coach behind him. Through the window she could see only 2 passengers, and the stage was built to hold 6 inside and more on top. "It doesn't look full, sir." "I have the exact fare, and I need to reach Cheyenne by tomorrow evening. My aunt is very ill." "I said it's full." The driver crossed his arms over his barrel chest. "Now move along before you scare off my paying customers." Heat rushed to Elena's cheeks, but she held her ground. "This is a public stage line. You're required by the territorial charter to sell passage to anyone who can pay. Listen here, girl." The driver leaned forward, his breath sour. "I don't care what blood runs in your veins or what fancy words you learned somewhere. I decide who rides my stage, and I decide you don't. Now get before I have the sheriff remove you. That won't be necessary." The voice came from behind Elena, deep and calm with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. She turned to find a man perhaps 5 or 6 years older than her own, 22 years, tall and lean in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback. His hat was pushed back enough to show sandy brown hair and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore a gun on his hip like most men in Wyoming territory, but something about the way he carried himself suggested he knew how to use it. "This doesn't concern you, mister," the driver said, though his tone had lost some of its venom. "Benjamin Irving," the stranger said, extending his hand to the driver, who shook it reflexively. "And I think it does concern me, seeing as I was about to purchase passage on this very stage." He pulled a leather wallet from his vest pocket and counted out bills onto the counter, twice the normal fare. "Now, I'm a paying customer, and I'd be mighty disappointed to learn that Wells Fargo discriminates against fellow travelers. Seems to me that could cause all sorts of legal troubles for the company." The driver's face reddened. "Now see here. Tell you what," Benjamin continued, his voice still pleasant but with an edge of steel underneath. "The lady here needs passage to Cheyenne. I need passage to Cheyenne. Why don't you take this money, which I believe is double your usual rate, and we'll forget this whole unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened." He paused, then added quietly, "Because if we don't forget it, I might have to mention it to my employer, and the Union Pacific Railroad tends to have strong opinions about the conduct of companies that service their routes." The driver's jaw worked silently for a moment. Elena watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, weighing his prejudice against the potential consequences. Finally, he snatched up the money and jerked his head toward the stage. "Fine, but any trouble and you're both out, fare or no fare." "There won't be any trouble," Benjamin said easily. He turned to Elena and touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, would you do me the honor of riding to Cheyenne with me?" Elena found herself speechless for a moment, caught off guard by both his intervention and the genuine respect in his tone. I have my own fare, sir. You didn't need to keep your money, he said, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile if it reached his eyes. Use it for your aunt's medicine or whatever she needs. Consider it my way of apologizing for the rudeness you just endured. I can't accept charity, Elena said, straightening her spine. She had learned long ago that accepting help often came with strings attached, invisible threads that could tangle a person up before they realized they were trapped. Benjamin regarded her for a long moment, and Elena had the uncomfortable sensation of being truly seen, not just glanced at or looked through like most white folks did when they encountered her. It's not charity, he said finally. It's common decency, which seems to be in short supply around here. Please, I insist. The stage driver coughed impatiently, and Elena realized she was holding up the departure. With a small nod, she accepted Benjamin's offer and allowed him to help her up into the coach. His hand was warm and calloused against hers, the grip of someone who worked for a living rather than simply gave orders. Inside the stage, the other two passengers, both men in business suits, gave her cold looks but said nothing. Benjamin settled into the seat beside her rather than across from her, a subtle statement of solidarity that wasn't lost on Elena or the other passengers. As the driver climbed up to his bench and snapped the reins, the stage lurched into motion with a jolt that sent Elena swaying against Benjamin's shoulder. Sorry, she murmured, righting herself quickly. No need to apologize, he said. These roads are rough enough to rattle a person's teeth loose. I'm Benjamin, by the way, Benjamin Irving, though most folks call me Ben. Elena Dawson, she replied, then added, Thank you for what you did back there. You didn't have to get involved. Ben shrugged, looking out the window at the passing landscape. My mother raised me to stand up when something's wrong. She'd probably reach down from heaven and box my ears if I just stood by and watched that driver treat you like that. Your mother sounds like she was a good woman. She was, Ben said, and there was real grief in those two words despite what Elena guessed had been years since the loss. Lost her to cholera when I was 17. My father went a year later from a broken heart, or so the doctor said. Pneumonia, officially, but I always figured it was really the loneliness that killed him. Elena found herself wanting to offer comfort, to reach out and touch his hand, but she kept her own hands folded in her lap. I'm sorry. That must have been very difficult. It was a long time ago, Ben said, though his eyes suggested it wasn't as long ago as all that in his heart. What about you? You said your aunt is ill. Yes, in Cheyenne. She's the only family I have left. Elena hesitated, then decided this man who had shown her kindness deserved honesty. My mother died when I was 12, a fever that swept through our camp. My father tried to raise me on his own, but he was killed 3 years ago in a hunting accident. My Aunt Agnes took me in after that, taught me to read and write properly, helped me understand my father's world as well as my mother's. That's why you knew about the territorial charter, Ben said with understanding in his voice. Elena nodded. My aunt believes education is the greatest weapon against prejudice. She says if I know the law, no one can convince me I have fewer rights than I actually do. Your aunt sounds wise. She is, Elena said, and felt her throat tighten with worry. That's why I have to reach her. The telegram said she collapsed, that the doctor isn't sure she'll make it through the week. She's all I have and I'm all she has. Ben was quiet for a moment, then said, We'll get you there. I promise. It was a strange thing to promise, considering he had no control over the speed of the horses or the condition of the roads, but Elena found herself comforted by his words anyway. There was something solid about Benjamin Irving, something that suggested when he gave his word, he meant it. The stage rattled on through the afternoon, stopping once at a way station to change horses and allow the passengers to stretch their legs and use the facilities. The two businessmen hurried inside the station without a word, but Ben waited while Elena returned from the outhouse, then walked with her to the well where they could draw fresh water. "You work for the railroad?" Elena asked, remembering his comment to the stage driver. "In a manner of speaking," Ben said, working the pump handle until cool water gushed into the wooden bucket below. "I'm a surveyor, mostly. I go ahead of the rail lines, mapping routes, checking for problems, sometimes negotiating with landowners or tribes for right-of-way access." "That must take you far from home." "Would if I had a home to be far from," Ben said with a slight smile. "I've been living out of saddlebags and hotel rooms for the better part of 5 years now. It suits me mostly. I like seeing new places, meeting new people. Don't you get lonely?" Ben paused in the act of dipping a tin cup into the bucket, and Elena realized she had perhaps asked something too personal. But he didn't seem offended, just thoughtful. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There are nights when I'm camped under the stars, and I think about what it might be like to have a place to come home to, someone to come home to. But then morning comes and I move on, and the feeling passes." He offered her the cup first, and Elena drank gratefully, the water cold and sweet after the dust of the road. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed, and she felt a strange jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the water or the heat of the afternoon. "What about you?" Ben asked after he had drunk his fill. "What do you do in Evanston?" "I work at the general store," Elena said. "Mr. Patterson hired me 2 years ago to keep his books and manage inventory. He's one of the few who doesn't care about my heritage, only whether I can do the work." "And can you?" Elena allowed herself a small smile. "I increased his profits by 20% in the first year. He gave me a raise and told me I have a position as long as I want it." "That's impressive," Ben said, and he sounded like he meant it. "You have a head for numbers then. My aunt taught me." She was a school teacher back east before she came west with her husband. He died of consumption 5 years ago, but she stayed in Cheyenne, said she'd grown fond of the mountains and the big sky. They were called back to the stage then, and Elena found herself oddly reluctant to end the conversation. Benjamin Irving was unlike any man she had encountered before, neither patronizing nor predatory, neither overly familiar nor coldly distant. He treated her like a person, plain and simple, and that was so rare in Elena's experience that she hardly knew how to respond to it. As the stage continued south toward Cheyenne, the landscape changed gradually from the high plains around Evanston to the rolling hills that preceded the capital. The two businessmen dozed in their seats, heads lolling with the motion of the coach, but Elena found herself too anxious to sleep. She watched the countryside pass and thought about her aunt, about what she would find when she finally reached Cheyenne, about whether she would arrive in time to say goodbye. "Tell me about her," Ben said quietly, and Elena realized he had been watching her face. "My aunt?" "Yes." "What's she like?" Elena considered for a moment, then began to speak, her voice soft so as not to disturb the sleeping passengers. "She's fierce, first of all. When I came to live with her after my father died, some of the neighbors complained about having a half-breed in their respectable neighborhood. Aunt Agnes invited them all to tea and told them in the politest possible terms that if they had a problem with her niece, they could take it up with her lawyer, who happened to be the territorial attorney general. They never bothered her again." Ben chuckled quietly. "I like her already. She's kind, too, though she hides it behind a stern exterior. She used to sneak me peppermint sticks when I was first learning to read, one for every book I finished. She never admitted it, but I knew she was spending her own money on them, money she could barely spare." She loves you, Ben said simply. Yes, Elena agreed, feeling tears prick at her eyes. And I love her. She's the one who taught me I didn't have to choose between my mother's heritage and my father's, that I could honor both and be stronger for it. She's the one who told me I had just as much right to walk down any street in America as anyone else, and if people didn't like it, that was their problem, not mine. She sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, Elena whispered. She has to be all right, she has to be. Ben reached over then and took her hand, a gesture that should have been presumptuous but somehow wasn't. His palm was warm against hers, his fingers gentle as they squeezed reassuringly. We're making good time. We'll reach Cheyenne before midnight, I'd wager. You'll see her soon. Elena held onto his hand, drawing strength from the contact, and didn't pull away. They rode like that for miles, two strangers connected by something neither of them quite understood yet, both sensing that this chance meeting on a dusty Wyoming street was the beginning of something that couldn't be easily defined or dismissed. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the mountains on fire, the stage driver called down that they would be stopping at one more way station for the night. Elena's heart sank. I thought we'd reach Cheyenne tonight, she said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. Driver probably wants to avoid traveling in the dark, Ben said. The roads can be dangerous at night and horses can stumble in ruts they'd avoid during daylight. But my aunt, I know, Ben said. Let me talk to him. When the stage pulled into the station, a ramshackle building with a stable and a corral out back, Ben climbed down first and went directly to the driver. Elena couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Ben pull out his wallet again and watched as the driver's resistant posture gradually softened. After several minutes of discussion, Ben came back to the coach. We have two options, he told Elena. We can stay here tonight and reach Cheyenne by mid-morning, or we can continue on. The driver's willing to push through if we make it worth his while, but he says the last stretch is rough country and there's been talk of bandits working the road. I want to continue, Elena said immediately. I figured you would, Ben said. That's what I told him. The businessmen have decided to stay here, but the drivers agreed to take just the two of us on to Cheyenne if we're willing to take the risk. You don't have to come, Elena said. You've already done so much, Elena, Ben interrupted gently. I'm not letting you travel that road alone at night, so if you're going, I'm going. That's the end of it. The way he said her name, with a familiarity that felt earned rather than presumptuous, made something warm bloom in Elena's chest. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and Ben went to inform the driver of their decision. 20 minutes later, after a quick meal of jerky and hardtack from the way station's meager stores, they were back on the road. This time Elena and Ben were the only passengers, and the increased privacy felt both comforting and slightly dangerous. They sat across from each other now rather than side by side, and in the darkness of the coach interior, lit only by the moon streaming through the windows, Elena found herself studying Benjamin Irving's face. He had strong features, she decided, not conventionally handsome but striking in their own way. There was character written in the lines around his eyes, integrity in the set of his jaw. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred and weathered, the hands of a man who had worked hard all his life. When he caught her looking, she expected him to make some comment or assumption, but he just held her gaze calmly, as if he understood she was trying to figure him out and was content to let her look her fill. Why did you really help me? Elena asked finally, voicing the question that had been nagging at her since Evanston. And please don't say common decency. You could have expressed your disapproval without spending your own money or putting yourself at risk traveling through the night. Ben was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and honest. About 4 years ago, I was working a survey up in Montana Territory. We were supposed to meet with a Crow chief to negotiate passage through tribal lands. Our translator didn't show up and we were stuck, unable to communicate what we needed. Then this young Crow woman, couldn't have been more than 18 or 19, stepped forward. She spoke perfect English, better than mine, honestly. She translated for us, helped us understand the tribe's concerns, helped us reach an agreement that worked for everyone. He paused, looking out the window at the dark landscape rolling past. After the negotiations, I thanked her, asked where she learned to speak English so well. She told me she'd been educated at a mission school, that she dreamed of becoming a teacher herself. Then she looked at me and said something I've never forgotten. She said, "The color of my skin will always matter more to most people than the content of my mind." And I realized she was right, and I realized how fundamentally wrong that was. Ben's eyes returned to Elena's face. "So when I saw that driver refusing you passage for no reason other than the color of your skin, I thought about that young woman in Montana, and how tired she must have been of fighting that same battle every single day. And I thought maybe, just this once, I could make it so someone didn't have to fight alone." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. "What happened to her? The woman in Montana?" "I don't know," Ben admitted. "I've always hoped she found a way to teach, to use that brilliant mind of hers. But honestly, I'm afraid she probably didn't. The world isn't kind to people who don't fit into neat categories." "No," Elena agreed softly. "It isn't." They fell into a comfortable silence after that. The kind of quiet that exists between people who have said something real and meaningful, and don't need to fill the space with empty chatter. Elena found herself dozing despite her anxiety, lulled by the rhythm of the stage and the surprising sense of safety she felt with Benjamin across from her. She woke with a jolt when the stage suddenly lurched to a halt, throwing her forward. Ben caught her before she could hit the opposite seat, his hand strong on her shoulders. "Whoa there," he said, steadying her. Then, more seriously, "Something's wrong." They heard shouting outside, and Ben immediately moved to position himself between Elena and the door, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. The door was yanked open a moment later, and a masked figure with a rifle appeared in the opening. "Out," the man barked. "Both of you now, and keep your hands where I can see them." Ben climbed out first, his movements slow and deliberate, hands raised to shoulder height. Elena followed, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Outside, 3 more masked men had surrounded the stage, all armed. The driver sat frozen on his bench, hands in the air. "Well now," one of the bandits said, walking around Elena in a slow circle that made her skin crawl. "What have we here? Looks like we got ourselves a genuine Indian princess." "Leave her alone," Ben said, his voice hard as iron. "You want money, I've got money. Just take it and let us go." "Oh, we'll take your money, friend," the bandit said, not taking his eyes off Elena. "But maybe we'll have ourselves a little fun first. Been a long time since we had company out here, especially pretty company." Elena saw Ben's jaw clench, saw his hands ball into fists despite the guns pointed at him. She knew with sudden certainty that he was about to do something brave and stupid and probably fatal, and she couldn't let that happen. "I have jewelry," she said quickly before Ben could act. "In my satchel. It's worth quite a bit, more than whatever cash you'll find on him." It was a lie. She had no jewelry except her mother's beaded bracelet, which was worthless to anyone but her. But it bought her a few seconds, and a few seconds might be enough. The bandit leader gestured to one of his men, who grabbed Elena's satchel from inside the coach and dumped its contents on the ground. Clothes, a few books, some personal items, and the bracelet scattered in the dirt. The bandit picked up the bracelet, examined it, and laughed. "You lying little," he started to say, but whatever insult he had planned was cut off by the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast. "Riders coming." One of the other bandits shouted, and suddenly the situation dissolved into chaos. The bandits scrambled for their horses, apparently deciding that whatever prize Elena represented wasn't worth a potential fight with unknown odds. Within seconds, they were galloping away into the darkness, leaving Elena, Ben, and the driver standing in the road. The approaching riders turned out to be a cavalry patrol from Fort Russell, 5 soldiers led by a young lieutenant who looked barely old enough to shave. They had heard reports of bandits in the area and were conducting nighttime patrols. The lieutenant took statements, made notes in a small book, and strongly suggested they turn back to the way station until morning. "We're continuing to Cheyenne," Ben said firmly. "But we're grateful for the timely arrival, Lieutenant. Another few minutes and things could have gone very differently." The lieutenant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Ben's tone made it clear the discussion was over. Instead, he assigned 2 of his soldiers to escort the stage the rest of the way to Cheyenne, which was only another 8 miles down the road. As Elena gathered her scattered belongings from the dirt, Ben knelt beside her to help. "That was quick thinking," he said quietly, "and very brave." "It was a terrible lie," Elena said, carefully folding her spare dress. "What if they'd been angrier about it?" "Then I would have done what I was already planning to do," Ben said, and there was something in his voice that made Elena look up sharply. "Which was?" "Whatever it took to keep you safe." He said it matter-of-factly, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if he hadn't known her for less than a day. Elena's hand stilled on her mother's bracelet. "You could have been killed. So could you?" Ben's eyes met hers in the moonlight. "That wasn't something I was willing to risk." They stared at each other for a long moment, and Elena felt something shift between them, some invisible line being crossed. This wasn't just kindness anymore, wasn't just one stranger helping another. This was something deeper, something that frankly terrified her, because she had known this man for less than 12 hours, and already the thought of him putting himself in danger on her behalf made her chest ache. "We should go," she said finally, breaking eye contact and standing up perhaps a bit too quickly. "My aunt is waiting." The rest of the journey to Cheyenne passed without incident, the presence of the cavalry soldiers ensuring the bandits stayed far away. They reached the capital just after midnight, the streets mostly empty except for the lights of a few saloons still doing business. Ben helped Elena down from the stage in front of the Wells Fargo office and immediately began looking for a way to transport her to her aunt's address. "I can walk," Elena protested. "It's not far." At midnight, after what just happened, Ben shook his head. "Not a chance. Wait here." He returned 5 minutes later with a sleepy stable boy and a small wagon. "Climb up," he said, offering Elena his hand. "We'll have you to your aunt's in no time." Elena gave him the address, a modest house on the north side of town, and they set off through the quiet streets. Now that they were finally here, Elena felt her anxiety return full force. What would she find when she arrived? Would her aunt still be alive? Would Elena have the chance to say goodbye, to say thank you for everything Agnes had done for her? As if sensing her thoughts, Ben reached over and took her hand again. This time Elena didn't hesitate to hold on tight. When they pulled up in front of a small white house with a neat garden, Elena could see lamplight in the windows. She climbed down from the wagon before Ben could help her and ran up the front path to knock on the door. It was opened almost immediately by a middle-aged woman with a kind face and tired eyes. "You must be Elena," she said. "I'm Mrs. Morrison, your aunt's neighbor. I've been sitting with her." "How is she?" Elena asked, afraid of the answer. "Holding on," Mrs. Morrison said. "She's been asking for you. Come in, dear. She's in the bedroom." Elena started toward the house, then turned back to where Ben still sat in the wagon. "Will you wait?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. "As long as you need," he promised. Elena followed Mrs. Morrison inside and down a short hallway to a bedroom where her aunt lay propped up on pillows, her face pale but her eyes bright when she saw Elena enter. "There you are," Agnes said, her voice weak but steady. "I was starting to think you wouldn't make it." "I'm here, Aunt Agnes," Elena said, rushing to kneel beside the bed and take her aunt's thin hand in both of hers. "I'm here." "You look like you've been through an adventure," Agnes observed, taking in Elena's dusty clothes and wind-blown hair. "I'll tell you all about it," Elena promised. "But first, tell me what happened. Mrs. Morrison said you collapsed." Agnes made a dismissive gesture. "Doctors make everything sound dramatic. I had a spell with my heart, that's all. Scared me more than anything. Made me realize I needed to see you, needed to tell you some things I should have said a long time ago." "Aunt Agnes, don't talk like that. You're going to be fine." "Perhaps," Agnes allowed. "But perhaps not, and either way I need you to listen." For the next hour, as Mrs. Morrison quietly excused herself, and the house settled into nighttime silence. Agnes talked and Elena listened. She talked about her own youth, about the choices she had made and the regrets she carried. She talked about Elena's parents, stories Elena had never heard before about her father's courage in choosing love over social acceptance, and her mother's grace in navigating two worlds. "You have the best of both of them in you," Agnes said, her hand tightening on Elena's. "Your father's determination and your mother's wisdom. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than whole, less than worthy because of who your parents were." "I won't," Elena promised, tears streaming down her face. "You taught me better than that." "Good," Agnes said with satisfaction. Then, with a slight smile, "Now tell me about this adventure you had getting here, and don't leave anything out." So Elena told her, starting with the stage driver's refusal and Benjamin's intervention. She described the journey, the bandit attack, and how Ben had been willing to risk himself to protect her. As she talked, she saw her aunt's expression shift from concern to interest to something that looked suspiciously like knowing amusement. "This Benjamin," Agnes said when Elena finished. "Where is he now?" "Outside, I think. He said he'd wait." "At this hour? After traveling all day and being attacked by bandits?" Agnes tried to sit up straighter. "Elena Dawson, you get that young man in here right now. I want to meet the person who showed such kindness to my niece." "Aunt Agnes, it's the middle of the night. You need rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead," Agnes said tartly, sounding more like her usual self than she had all night. "Go get him. I insist." Elena, knowing from long experience that arguing with her aunt was futile when she used that tone, went to find Ben. He was sitting on the front porch steps, apparently content to wait there for however long necessary. He stood quickly when Elena opened the door. "How is she?" he asked immediately. "Better than I feared. She wants to meet you." Ben looked surprised. "Me? Why?" "Because you helped me, and because she's curious, and because when Aunt Agnes wants something, it's generally easier to just give in." Elena managed a small smile. "Please, it would mean a lot to her, and to me." Ben followed Elena inside and into Agnes's bedroom, removing his hat respectfully as he entered. Agnes looked him up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and Elena could see her aunt cataloging every detail, forming judgments and conclusions. "So you're the young man who paid my niece's fare," Agnes said. "Yes, madam," Ben replied. "Though honestly, I just did what anyone decent would have done." "You'd be surprised how few people meet that standard," Agnes said dryly. "Elena tells me you also faced down armed bandits on her behalf." "I didn't do much facing down, madam. We were fortunate that cavalry patrol came along when it did." "Modest, too," Agnes observed, and Elena could see the approval in her eyes. "Sit down, young man. You look dead on your feet." Ben glanced at Elena, who nodded, and he took a seat in the chair near the bed. For the next half hour, Agnes questioned him with the thoroughness of a prosecuting attorney, asking about his work, his family, his plans for the future. Ben answered everything honestly and patiently, and Elena watched in amazement as her formidable aunt gradually softened toward this stranger. Finally, Agnes said, "Elena, dear, would you go ask Mrs. Morrison if she could make some tea? I suspect we could all use a cup." Elena recognized a dismissal when she heard one, and curiosity burned in her as she left the room, wondering what her aunt wanted to say to Ben in private. She found Mrs. Morrison in the kitchen, already preparing tea as if she had anticipated the request, and stayed to help despite wanting desperately to know what was being discussed in the other room. When she returned 10 minutes later with a tray bearing 3 cups, she found her aunt looking tired but satisfied and Ben looking somewhat dazed. Neither of them volunteered what had been said in her absence, and Elena didn't ask, though she burned with curiosity. They drank their tea, and Agnes's eyelids began to droop despite her obvious efforts to stay awake. "I think," she said finally, "I should rest now. Elena, there's a spare room upstairs. Mr. Irving can stay there tonight rather than trying to find a hotel at this hour." "Oh, I couldn't impose," Ben started to say, but Agnes waved him off. "Nonsense. You've traveled all day, been attacked by criminals, and answered an old woman's interrogation. The least I can offer is a bed for what's left of the night." Her eyes found Elena's. "You'll stay too, of course. Your old room is just as you left it." Elena wanted to protest that she should stay by her aunt's side, but she could see Agnes was genuinely exhausted, and Mrs. Morrison had already resumed her seat in the corner, clearly prepared to keep watch through the night. "Get some rest, both of you," Agnes said, her eyes already closing. "We'll talk more in the morning." Elena showed Ben upstairs to the small but comfortable guest room, acutely aware of the impropriety of having a man she'd just met staying under her aunt's roof. But she was also too exhausted to care much about propriety, and besides, if Aunt Agnes approved, that was good enough for her. "Thank you," Ben said as they stood in the narrow hallway between the guest room and Elena's old bedroom. "For today, for tonight, for everything. I know you're grateful to me, but truthfully I feel like I should be thanking you." "For what?" Elena asked, confused. "For letting me help," Ben said simply. "For trusting me even when you had no reason to. For reminding me why I loved the West in the first place, all the possibility and promise it represents." He was standing close enough that Elena could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. For a wild moment she thought he might kiss her, and for an even wilder moment she thought she might let him. But instead, he just reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a second against her cheek. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. "Good night, Ben," she whispered back. She lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling of her old room and trying to make sense of the feelings churning inside her. She had known Benjamin Irving for less than 24 hours. How was it possible to feel this way about someone after such a short time? Was it gratitude she was feeling, some misplaced sense of obligation because he had helped her? Or was it something deeper, something that had taken root the moment he had stood up to that stage driver and asked her to ride with him instead. Elena must have eventually fallen asleep because she woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of bacon cooking downstairs. She dressed quickly and went down to find Ben in the kitchen, apparently having volunteered to help Mrs. Morrison with breakfast while Agnes continued to rest. "She had a good night," Mrs. Morrison reported cheerfully. "I looked in on her an hour ago, and she was sleeping peacefully. The crisis seems to have passed, thank the Lord." Relief washed over Elena so strongly she had to steady herself against the doorframe. Ben noticed and was immediately at her side, his hand on her elbow, supporting her. "Easy," he said gently. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" Elena tried to remember and couldn't. "Yesterday morning, I think." "Then sit down and let us feed you," Ben said, guiding her to a chair at the kitchen table. "Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor," Elena pointed out, but she was smiling as she said it. "No, but I've been around enough to know when someone's running on empty," Ben replied, setting a plate of eggs and bacon in front of her. "Eat." They were finishing breakfast when Agnes called out from her bedroom. Elena rushed to her side and found her aunt sitting up in bed, color back in her cheeks and a familiar spark in her eyes. "Stop hovering," Agnes said, but her tone was affectionate. "I'm not dying today, much as that might disappoint the doctors who have been collecting fees from me." "Aunt Agnes, you shouldn't joke about such things," Elena chided, but she was grinning with relief. "I'll joke about whatever I please," Agnes said. "Now, is that young man still here, or did you let him escape?" "He's downstairs, helping Mrs. Morrison clean up from breakfast." "Good. Tell him I want to speak with both of you." 5 minutes later, Elena and Ben were seated side by side in chairs pulled up near Agnes's bed. The morning light streaming through the windows made the room feel cheerful rather than sick-roomy, and Agnes looked more like her old self with every passing moment. "I'm going to be direct," Agnes said, looking between them. "Because I've learned that life is too short and too uncertain for dancing around important matters. Benjamin, you're planning to return to your survey work, I assume?" "Yes, madam," Ben said. "I have a job waiting for me in Colorado. I was actually supposed to start last week, but I wired them that I'd been delayed." "And Elena, you're planning to return to Evanston and your position at the general store?" "I was," Elena said slowly, not sure where this was going. "But if you need me here, if you need someone to help you recover—" "I don't," Agnes interrupted. "Mrs. Morrison and I have already discussed it. She'll look in on me daily, and I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself for the most part. What I'm not capable of doing is watching my brilliant, capable niece waste her potential keeping books in a backwater town for the rest of her life." "Aunt Agnes, let me finish," Agnes said firmly. "Elena, you could do so much more than you're doing. You have skills, education, determination. But you've been hiding in Evanston, playing it safe because it's familiar, and because Mr. Patterson is one of the few people there who treats you with respect." She paused, then added more gently, "But you're 22 years old, my dear. This is the time to take risks, to see what you're truly capable of." Elena felt tears pricking at her eyes. "I don't know what you want me to do." "I want you to live," Agnes said simply. "I want you to stop settling for good enough and start reaching for extraordinary." Her eyes shifted to Ben. "Which brings me to you, young man. Last night when Elena was out of the room, I asked you a question. Do you remember what it was?" Ben's ears turned slightly red. "Yes, madam." "And do you remember your answer?" "Yes, madam." "Would you mind sharing it with my niece?" Ben looked at Elena, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her breath catch. "Your aunt asked me what my intentions were toward you," he said quietly. "And I told her the truth, which is that I've never felt this way about anyone after knowing them such a short time. I told her that if you'd have me, if you'd take the risk of trusting me, I'd count myself the luckiest man alive. Elena stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. But you're leaving for Colorado, and I have my job, my life in Evanston. You could come with me, Ben said, the words tumbling out now as if he'd been holding them back and couldn't anymore. Not right away, not until you're ready, but eventually. Survey crews always need people who can keep records, manage logistics, work with local populations. You'd be perfect for it, and we'd see the West together, all of it, from the mountains to the deserts to everything in between. You're asking me to abandon everything I know to follow a man I just met, Elena said, and she couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. No, Ben said firmly. I'm asking you to take a chance on something that could be wonderful. I'm asking you to trust that what we felt yesterday, what I think we're both still feeling today, is real and worth exploring. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or to promise me forever. I'm just asking you to give us a chance. Elena looked at her aunt, hoping for guidance, and found Agnes smiling knowingly. This is your decision, dear, but I will say that when I was your age, I played it safe. I married a good man who I respected but didn't truly love because he was stable and reliable and appropriate. And I've never regretted the choice exactly, but I've often wondered what might have happened if I'd been brave enough to follow my heart instead of my head. What if it doesn't work? Elena asked, addressing the question to both of them. What if I go with him and we discover we barely know each other, that we were caught up in the drama of the moment? Then you'll have seen some of the country and had an adventure, Agnes said practically. And you'll still have your skills and your education, and you'll find another position somewhere else. Elena, you're not a china doll that will shatter if dropped. You're stronger than you know. Ben reached over and took Elena's hand, the gesture already becoming familiar. I can't promise it will be easy, he said honestly. My work takes me to remote places, sometimes dangerous places, and you'll face prejudice, probably more than you do in Evanston where people at least know you. But I swear to you, Elena, I will never be the source of that prejudice. I will never make you feel less than extraordinary. And if you give me the chance, I think we could build something really special together. Elena looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-weathered skin and her own darker tone, and thought about all the reasons she should say no. It was impractical, impulsive, possibly insane to even consider. She had responsibilities, obligations, a safe if limited future waiting for her in Evanston. But she also had her aunt's words ringing in her ears about not settling for good enough, about being brave enough to reach for extraordinary. And she had the memory of Benjamin standing up to that stage driver, of him being willing to face down bandits to keep her safe, of him looking at her like she was someone worth knowing rather than someone to be tolerated or dismissed. Okay, she heard herself say, and was shocked to realize she meant it. Okay, I'll come with you. Not forever, not yet, but for a trial period. I'll give this a real chance. The smile that broke across Ben's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He stood, pulling Elena to her feet, and for a moment she thought he might sweep her into an embrace right there in front of her aunt. But he restrained himself, just holding both her hands and looking at her like she had given him something precious beyond measure. You won't regret this, he promised. I'd better not, Elena said, but she was smiling too, feeling something like joy bubbling up inside her chest. Excellent, Agnes said with satisfaction. Now that that's settled, let's discuss practical matters. Elena, you'll need to return to Evanston to give Mr. Patterson proper notice and to collect your things. Benjamin, I assume you need to wire your employers in Colorado. Yes, madam, Ben said, finally tearing his eyes away from Elena. I should do that today. Good. I suggest you both take a few days here in Cheyenne to rest and plan. Elena can stay here with me, and Benjamin, I'm sure the hotel on Main Street has rooms available. Use this time to get to know each other properly, not in the midst of crisis and emergency. It was sensible advice, and over the next 3 days, Elena and Ben followed it. They walked through Cheyenne together, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Ben told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to survey from his father, about his dreams of someday starting his own surveying company. Elena shared her memories of growing up between two cultures, the summers spent with her mother's people learning their ways, and the winters in her father's cabin learning to raid and cipher. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated bitter coffee. They argued good-naturedly about whether horses or mules made better pack animals. They shared their fears and hopes, their disappointments and dreams, and with each conversation, Elena felt more certain that this crazy, impulsive decision was somehow exactly right. On the third evening, Ben took Elena to dinner at Cheyenne's finest restaurant, a place called the Tivoli that served steaks and had real crystal chandeliers. Elena was nervous walking in, acutely aware of the looks they received, the way conversations paused as they passed. But Ben kept his hand at the small of her back, steady and reassuring, and when they were seated, he leaned across the table and said quietly, "Let them look. You're the most beautiful woman in this room, and I'm the luckiest man." Elena felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. "You're a shameless flatterer, Benjamin Irving." "Not flattery if it's true," he replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. Over dinner, they discussed logistics. Elena would return to Evanston the following week to give her notice and pack her belongings. Ben would travel ahead to Colorado to begin the survey work, and Elena would join him in 6 weeks at a town called Durango, where his crew would be based through the summer. 6 weeks seems like a long time, Elena said, surprised by how much the thought of being separated from him bothered her. "I know," Ben agreed, "but it gives you time to be sure, to really think about whether this is what you want, and it gives me time to prepare, to make sure I can provide proper accommodations for you and to talk to my employer about bringing you on as part of the crew. What if they say no?" "Then I'll find different work," Ben said simply. "Elena, I meant what I said. I'm not asking you to follow me and then leaving you with nothing to do and no purpose. We're going to be partners in this, equals. Your skills and your knowledge are going to be just as valuable as mine." The certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that he meant every word, made Elena's heart swell with an emotion she wasn't quite ready to name yet. It was too soon for love, she told herself. This was still new, still fragile, still untested by the realities of daily life and hard work. But it felt an awful lot like love anyway. The next morning, Elena boarded the stage back to Evanston, this time without incident. The driver was different, a cheerful man who tipped his hat politely and didn't even blink at her appearance. Ben rode alongside the stage on a horse he'd purchased, unwilling to let her make the journey alone even though she assured him she'd be fine. When they reached Evanston 2 days later, Ben helped her down from the stage and walked her to her small rented room above the general store. At her door, he took both her hands in his. 6 weeks, he said, and then I'll be waiting for you in Durango. 6 weeks, Elena echoed. Then, before she could lose her nerve, she stood on her toes and kissed him, quick and soft but deliberate when she pulled back. Ben looked dazed. "What was that for?" "For being brave enough to help me that day at the stage office," Elena said. "For showing me that taking risks can lead to wonderful things. For asking me to ride with you." Ben smiled, that sunrise smile she was already addicted to seeing. "Best decision I ever made." He kissed her again, longer this time, one hand coming up to cup her cheek, while the other remained tangled with hers. It was sweet and searching and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, Elena knew with absolute certainty that 6 weeks was going to feel like an eternity. The next morning, she gave her notice to Mr. Patterson, who was disappointed but understanding. "I knew you wouldn't stay forever," he said, counting out her final wages. "You've got too much potential to spend your life in a backwater like this, but I'll miss you, Elena. You're the best employee I've ever had." "Thank you for giving me a chance when most others wouldn't," Elena said sincerely. "You'll never know how much that meant to me." She spent the following weeks packing her meager belongings, saying goodbye to the few people in Evanston who had been kind to her, and preparing for her new life. She received 3 letters from Ben during that time, each one more wonderful than the last. He wrote about the survey work, about the beauty of the Colorado mountains, about how much he missed her, and how he counted down the days until she arrived. Elena wrote back, sharing the small details of her days, trying to convey through words on paper how much those 6 weeks felt like forever, how often she thought of him, how certain she was becoming that this decision, crazy as it might be, was right. Finally, the day came for her departure. She took the stage to Cheyenne first, spending one night with her aunt, who was now fully recovered and back to her formidable self. "You look happy," Agnes observed as they sat together in the parlor that evening. "I am happy," Elena admitted. "Terrified but happy." "That's how you know it's real," Agnes said wisely. "If you weren't at least a little scared, it would mean you weren't risking anything worth having." The next morning, Elena boarded the Denver and Rio Grande Railway for the journey to Durango, her heart beating fast with anticipation and nerves. The train wound through mountain passes and along rushing rivers, through landscapes so beautiful it made her breath catch. And all the while, she thought about Ben waiting for her at the end of the line. When the train finally pulled into Durango's small station, Elena pressed her face to the window, searching the crowd on the platform. And there he was, pacing back and forth, checking his pocket watch every few seconds, looking anxious and eager and wonderful. The moment the train stopped, Elena was on her feet, nearly running down the aisle and out onto the platform. Ben saw her immediately, and his whole face lit up. He closed the distance between them in a few long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her clean off her feet and spinning her around while she laughed with pure joy. "You're here," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "You're really here. I was starting to worry you'd change your mind." "Not a chance," Elena said, and kissed him right there on the platform, not caring who saw or what they thought. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Ben took her hand and led her toward a wagon. "Come on, I want to show you something." They drove out of town and up into the foothills, finally stopping at a small but sturdy cabin with a view of the mountains that seemed to go on forever. "It's ours," Ben said. "Well, rented, technically, but ours for as long as we're working this survey. There's a bedroom, a kitchen, and even a small study where you can set up an office." Elena walked through the cabin, running her hands over the rough-hewn furniture, looking out the windows at the incredible view. It was simple, remote, and absolutely perfect. "The survey team is camped about 2 miles from here," Ben continued, following her through the cabin. "You'll meet them tomorrow. My employer agreed to hire you as the expedition secretary and liaison. You'll be responsible for keeping all our records, managing our supply orders, and serving as our primary contact with any local tribes we need to negotiate with." "He agreed to all that based on your recommendation?" Elena asked, surprised. "Well, I might have mentioned that you speak 3 languages, can keep books better than most professional accountants, and increased the profits of your previous employer by 20% in a single year," Ben said with a slight smile. "I also might have mentioned that if he didn't hire you, I'd resign and take my skills to a competitor. Ben, you could have lost your position. Then I would have found another one," he said simply. "Elena, I told you before we're partners in this. I meant it." She crossed the room to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. She could hear his heart beating steady and strong and felt his arms come around her in return. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For seeing me. For believing in me. For asking me to ride with you that day." Ben's arms tightened around her. "Best decision I ever made," he said again, and Elena knew he meant it just as much as he had the first time. The next few months passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Elena threw herself into her role with the survey team, quickly earning the respect of the rough crew of men who worked under Ben's direction. She organized their chaotic records into clear, comprehensible reports. She negotiated with local Ute bands for permission to survey their lands, her knowledge of indigenous customs and her mixed heritage serving as bridges where language alone would have failed. She managed their supply orders and budgets, catching several errors that would have cost the company significant money. And through it all, Ben was there, proud and supportive and clearly head over heels in love with her. They fell into an easy domesticity in the little cabin, cooking together in the evenings, reading aloud to each other before bed, talking for hours about everything and nothing. On Sundays, their only day off, they would explore the surrounding country on horseback, discovering hidden valleys and clear streams and meadows full of wildflowers. 3 months after Elena's arrival in Durango, on a clear September evening with the aspen trees turning gold on the mountainsides, Ben took her hand as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset. "I have something to ask you," he said, and there was nervousness in his voice that immediately caught Elena's attention. "What is it?" Ben stood, pulling her to her feet, then surprised her by dropping to one knee. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the last rays of the sun. "Elena Dawson," he said, looking up at her with his heart in his eyes. "These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life. You're brilliant and brave and beautiful, and I wake up every morning grateful that you took a chance on me. I know we haven't been together long, not by most standards, but I also know with absolute certainty that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I'll marry you." Ben stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her deeply, thoroughly, until they were both breathless and laughing. When they finally broke apart, Elena studied the ring on her hand, simple and perfect and real. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "We're in the middle of nowhere." "I may have made a very quick trip to Denver last week while you thought I was surveying the northern section," Ben admitted. "I wanted everything to be perfect." "It is perfect," Elena assured him. "You're perfect." "Hardly," Ben said with a laugh, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be perfect for you." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony in Durango, with Agnes making the long journey from Cheyenne to attend along with a handful of friends from the survey crew. Elena wore a simple white dress that Agnes had helped her sew, and Ben wore his best suit. And when they said their vows in the small church, Elena felt like her heart might burst from happiness. The survey work in Colorado lasted through the spring of 1879, and then Ben's company moved them to a new project in New Mexico Territory. Elena went with him gladly, their little household packing up and moving south to new landscapes and new challenges. They spent 2 years in New Mexico, during which Elena not only kept the survey records but began writing articles about the Western Territories for Eastern newspapers. Her unique perspective and beautiful prose earning her a small but dedicated readership. In the spring of 1881, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and terror in equal measure. They were living in a tent camp at the time, following a survey line through the desert, and Elena worried about bringing a child into such an uncertain lifestyle. But Ben was determined to take care of them both. He negotiated a temporary transfer to the company's office in Santa Fe, where they rented a small house with real walls and a roof. Their son was born in December of that year, a healthy baby boy with Ben's green eyes and Elena's dark hair. They named him James, after Ben's father, with the middle name of Kohana, meaning swift, in honor of Elena's Shoshone heritage. Being parents changed them both, deepened their love into something even more profound and unbreakable. They watched their son grow from an infant to a curious toddler to a bright, active little boy, and marveled at the life they had created together. When James was 2, Elena gave birth to a daughter, Sarah Agnes, named for Ben's mother and Elena's aunt. As the children grew, Ben and Elena made a decision together. They wanted to give their children stability, a real home rather than a nomadic life following survey lines across the West. Ben accepted a position as the head surveyor for the New Mexico territorial government, a role that kept him based primarily in Santa Fe with occasional trips into the field. Elena continued her writing, now focusing on books rather than articles, her first-hand accounts of life in the Western Territories becoming modestly popular back east. In 1889, they bought a house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, a sturdy adobe structure with a courtyard and room for the children to play. They added chickens and a milk cow, a dog that James named Scout, and a vegetable garden that Elena tended with care. It wasn't a fancy life, but it was a good life, full of love and laughter and purpose. Agnes came to visit as often as her advancing age allowed, delighting in her great-niece and great-nephew and never missing an opportunity to remind Elena that she had been right about taking risks. "Look what you would have missed," she would say, watching James and Sarah play in the courtyard. "All because a cowboy paid double your fare and asked you to ride with him." "Best decision I ever made," Elena would reply, echoing Ben's words from that first day. "Well, his decision, I suppose, but my decision to say yes." "Your decision to be brave," Agnes would correct. "Never forget that, Elena. You chose courage over comfort, possibility over safety. That's what made all this possible." As the years passed and the century turned, Elena and Ben watched their children grow into remarkable young adults. James became a cartographer, following in his father's footsteps, but with his own innovations and ideas. Sarah became a teacher, combining Agnes's passion for education with Elena's gift for bridging cultures. Both children married for love, and both eventually gave Elena and Ben grandchildren who filled their later years with joy. On a warm evening in the spring of 1910, Elena and Ben sat together on the porch of their Santa Fe home, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. They were both in their mid-50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the stories of the lives they had lived together. Ben's hand found Elena's, and their fingers intertwined with the easy familiarity of 3 decades together. "You ever regret it?" Ben asked quietly. It was a question he had asked before over the years, always seeking reassurance that Elena hadn't sacrificed too much to be with him. "Not once," Elena replied, as she always did. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never could have imagined, Ben. Adventure, purpose, love, family. Everything I ever wanted and so much more. You gave me all that too, Ben said, squeezing her hand. That day in Evanston, when I saw that driver refuse you passage, I had no idea I was about to meet the person who would change my entire life. We changed each other, Elena said. That's what love does, I think. It transforms us into better versions of ourselves. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing inside the house, visiting for Sunday dinner as had become their tradition. The adobe walls glowed warmly in the twilight, and smoke rose from the chimney, carrying with it the smell of the roast Sarah was preparing. "Do you remember," Ben said suddenly, "what your aunt said to me that night in Cheyenne, when she sent you out of the room?" Elena turned to look at him, curious. In all their years together, he had never shared the details of that private conversation. "I've always wondered." "She told me that if I ever hurt you, she would track me down and make me wish I'd never been born," Ben said with a slight smile. "But then she said something else, something that stuck with me. She said that she could see in my eyes that I already loved you, even though we'd known each other less than a day. And she said that kind of love, the kind that strikes like lightning and burns just as bright, either consumes you or forges you into something stronger than you could ever be alone." "And which did it do to us?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "Forged us," Ben said, pulling her close. "Made us into something stronger, something better, made us into us." Elena rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and leather, and the faint smell of pipe tobacco he occasionally indulged in. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stood in the Evanston street 32 years ago, coins clutched in her hand and fear in her heart. She thought about the brave cowboy who had stepped forward when he didn't have to, who had seen an injustice and decided to do something about it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for asking me to ride with you." "Thank you," Ben replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "for saying yes." Inside the house, they heard James calling them for dinner, heard Sarah's laugh and the children's excited chatter. Their life, their family, their future stretched out before them, built on the foundation of that single moment of courage and compassion in a dusty Wyoming town so many years ago. As they stood and walked hand in hand toward the warmth and light of their home, Elena sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought them together, for the love that had sustained them through challenges and changes, for the family they had built and the life they had shared. In the end, it all came down to one simple truth that had proven itself over and over again through the decades. Sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with careful planning or logical decision-making, but with a single act of kindness and the courage to follow where it leads. Ben held the door open for Elena, and she smiled up at him as she passed into the house, into the noise and warmth and love that filled every corner. Behind them, the last light of day faded from the sky, and the first stars shone bright and clear, illuminating the path they had walked together and the many years of happiness still to come. Their story had begun with a stagecoach driver's refusal and a cowboy's intervention, but it had become so much more than that. It had become a testament to the power of love to transcend boundaries, to bridge cultures, to transform two separate lives into one shared journey. It had become a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone, carried forward in the hearts of their children and grandchildren and all who came after. As Elena took her seat at the dinner table, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, she caught Ben's eye across the table and smiled. He smiled back, that same sunrise smile that had captured her heart 3 decades ago. And in that moment, Elena knew with absolute certainty that every risk had been worth it, every challenge overcome, every moment of doubt erased by the reality of the beautiful life they had built together. The journey that had begun with Ben asking her to ride with him instead had carried them further than either could have imagined, through trials and triumphs, sorrows and joys, always together, always stronger for having found each other. And as they blessed the meal and began to eat, talking and laughing with their family around them, Elena silently blessed that long-ago stage driver too. For without his prejudice, without that moment of injustice, she might never have discovered that sometimes the best destinations are the ones you never plan to reach. Years continued to pass in their Santa Fe home, each one adding new layers to the rich tapestry of their shared life. Ben eventually retired from surveying in 1915, and he and Elena spent their golden years traveling not for work, but for pleasure, revisiting places they had explored in their youth, and discovering new corners of the American West they had never seen before. They returned to Evanston once, in the summer of 1918, curious to see how the town had changed in the 40 years since Elena's departure. The general store was still there, though Mr. Patterson had long since passed on, and new owners ran the business. The Wells Fargo office was gone, replaced by a more modern building that housed the local bank. And the people on the streets were different too, a new generation that had never known Elena or remembered the prejudices that had once defined the town. Standing on that familiar Main Street, Ben put his arm around Elena's shoulders. "Any regrets?" he asked. Lena looked around at the town that had once been her entire world, then looked up at the man who had opened her eyes to so much more. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This place was never really home. You were. You are. Wherever we went together, that was home." They visited Agnes's grave in Cheyenne on that trip as well. The formidable woman had passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1902, at the age of 78, satisfied that she had lived to see Elena happy and settled with a family of her own. Elena placed wildflowers on the grave and whispered her thanks for all the wisdom and courage her aunt had given her, for pushing her to take that chance so many years ago. In 1920, James published a comprehensive atlas of the Southwestern Territories, dedicating it to his parents for inspiring his love of maps and exploration. Sarah opened a school specifically for children of mixed heritage, creating a safe space where kids like she had been could learn about both sides of their ancestry without shame or prejudice. Both achievements filled Elena and Ben with immense pride, knowing that the values they had tried to instill in their children were bearing fruit in the next generation. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children and grandchildren organized a celebration at the Santa Fe house. Friends came from across the territory, former survey crew members and their families, people Elena had interviewed for her writing, neighbors they had known for decades. The house overflowed with love and laughter, with stories told and retold about the couple who had overcome so much to build a life together. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had departed and the grandchildren had fallen asleep in various corners of the house, Elena and Ben found themselves once again on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 40 years, Elena mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that we met, and sometimes it feels like we've been together forever. Both, Ben said wisely. It's both. Every day with you is new and familiar all at once. You think we would have found each other if circumstances had been different? Elena asked. If that stage driver had just sold me a ticket like he should have, if our paths had never crossed that day. Ben considered the question seriously. "I'd like to think so," he said finally. "I'd like to believe that somehow, some way, we were meant to find each other. But I'm also grateful we don't have to wonder, because we did find each other, and we made a choice to build something beautiful together." "The best choice," Elena agreed, leaning into his warmth. They sat together until the night grew cool and the stars blazed bright above them. Two souls who had found each other against the odds and created a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. A story that proved prejudice could be overcome, that courage could be rewarded, that sometimes all it takes to change a life is one person willing to stand up and say, "Ride with me instead." As they finally rose to go inside, to sleep in the bed they had shared for 40 years, Elena paused at the door and looked back at the vast New Mexico sky, at the landscape that had become as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. She thought about that scared young woman with coins clutched in her hand, and she wished she could travel back through time to tell her younger self not to be afraid, that everything was going to be more than all right. But then again, maybe the fear had been necessary. Maybe without it, without the uncertainty and the risk, the rewards wouldn't have felt quite so sweet. Maybe the most precious things in life are precious precisely because we have to be brave to claim them. Ben appeared at her side, offering his hand as he had done thousands of times before, and Elena took it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as natural as breathing. Together they walked into their home, into the life they had built one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And as the door closed behind them, and the house settled into peaceful silence, the stars continued their eternal dance overhead, bearing witness to a love that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something timeless, something that would echo through the years long after the lovers themselves had passed into memory. The stagecoach driver had meant to hurt her that day in Evanston, to put her in her place, to remind her that she didn't belong. Instead, he had set in motion a chain of events that had given her everything she ever dreamed of and more. Sometimes, Elena thought as she drifted off to sleep in Ben's arms, the worst moments of our lives are secretly doorways to the best ones if only we're brave enough to walk through them. And she had been brave. They both had been. And oh, what a beautiful life their bravery had earned them.